My name is Dr. Austin Tay, and you are listening to Site Chat. Hi there, welcome to Site Chat. I'm your host, Dr. Austin Tay. Today, I'm very delighted to have Dr. Hodar Lam, Research
Um,
Assistant Professor of Work and Organizational Psychology with Lingnan University of Hong Kong, and also the Chair of the Division of Industrial Organizational Psychology of the Hong Kong Psychological Society. Hi there, Hodar.
Hi. Hi, Austin. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you as one of my
Yeah.
guests.
I
Now,
feel that we should have done this like a lot earlier, but
yes,
it is happening now.
it is happening now, which
Yeah.
is good. And as I said, I'm very delighted to have you because I know you have done a very specific research, which I think
Very niche
it is
topic.
very niche topic at the present
Yeah.
moment. So I
Yeah.
was just looking at your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Now you call yourself Dr. Lonely Ship. Now,
Yeah.
why is this the case?
So I think I could break this question down into two parts. So one is how did I got interested in the topic of loneliness in leadership context, and another part is why I would like name it this way. Maybe I'll start with the second question. I think generally my view, of course, is based on my research in so generally my research area is in the leadership field. So my take on leadership is actually my focus is on at least to me what distinguishes leadership from like management or being a manager is the relationship part. So leadership, I would say, and of course I'm happy to provide like references and so on, but it's not about only about the person, but it's about the social influence process. So you need a healthy relationship for leadership to happen, and the it may sound like a paradox or a dilemma in the first place, but when you think about loneliness and relationship, they are like two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
So we are unhappy or we feel disconnected in our social interactions, and that's why we feel lonely. And that's why I thought like at least from a theoretical perspective, like these two things are same sides of the coin, but why don't we just connect them? Speaking of connectedness, so this is why like I thought about the term like loneliness, and that's the title of my doctoral thesis, and then I just took it as my label or one of my identity as an researcher. And then for why I would be interested in the topic, like besides all of my lonely experiences in life, which I still experience, on a daily basis, but we could talk about that later on. But I was really inspired when I think about when I was searching for like my research topic for my doctoral thesis. I was recalling my observations of work experiences, and I thought about my first manager or first leader when I first joined the workforce as a full-time HR manager. I would say that he's my muse in that sense. So we have a habit of having a almost like daily meeting of at least an hour,
Yep.
but in which we will only spend like 5 to 10 minutes to talk about work. But
Mm-hmm.
in the remaining time, it's more about like me because I have a bit of a counseling background. Uh, maybe that's relevant, or maybe he just needed someone to talk. But we spend the rest of the meeting like me listening to him talking about his struggles. First, more about the struggles at work because we were facing a situation of really manpower shortage.
Yep.
So basically, he and I were covering the job responsibilities of his supposedly manager roles. So we were short of manpower. But then later on, he also started talking about his home situations, like he
Mm-hmm.
has fights with his daughters and so on. Um, and then I already got the impression that I don't know if friendship is a strong word to define our relationship at that time, but I really felt that he must be in a really lonely place, and because when I decided to quit my full-time job to become an IO psychologist, I was really hoping that I could create some impacts in employee well-being issues. And when we think about like employee well-being issues, of course, there are like physiological or other psychological factors, but also the social well-being or the social interactions, the quality of social interactions is also an important determinants of whether people are healthy physically and mentally. And that's why I have like the whole World Health Organization supporting this definition. So this is why I think loneliness is actually quite an important yet overlooked antecedent to a lot of well-being issues, at least in the work or employee context. So sounds like a bit of a long story, but that's how I got into the topic. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, fantastic. I mean, I was just listening to what you were saying. Having that name, Lonely, Dr.
Yeah.
Lonely Sheep, it's like you're now become the person who is actually navigating the ship, in an organization context,
So
helping people to uncover what loneliness is and to be aware of it, and at the same time to be open to talk about it. Your experience with your previous job, your manager, when as psychologists ourselves, sometimes we do fall into that space of being a listener, and then providing that kind of advice as we often do. So with that, you said this is how you kind of started doing the research, and obviously, as you said, is very connected to an individual's well-being. Now, you mentioned the word how loneliness is also connected with the social relationships that we have. Do you think in your research yourself, you have uncovered, I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is about leadership member exchange theory, whereby we want to have good leaders, but at the same time we also want to have good team members. And if leaders themselves are feeling very lonely, how then can they be good leaders? Is that something that you were uncovering in your research?
I would break your question down again in two parts.
Sure.
First is my take on or my approach, and then the second is about like some potential impacts or effects of or I wouldn't call it effects, but like correlations, like observations that we see among lonely leaders. So first of all, generally for my research, I primarily focus on the a specific yet I would say it's actually a large group of leaders which would be mid-level managers. So and that's I think that's important as to start the conversation because I think the whole top leaders being a CEO is so different from being a mid-level managers. So I would say I would start the whole conversation like talking about the cause or antecedents outcomes at the mid-level context. Partly because I think there's it's been more than 26 almost 30 years ago, some scholars compare the mid-level management context as like a bit of a sponge, but not to absorb like water in the organization, but to absorb the emotional energies, let's put it that way, in a more neutral way in organizations. So there are commands or requirements, demands from the top level, but then they need to filter. They cannot like directly just pass all the emotional energy to their team members. But at the same time, like subordinates or team members, they could also have their, frustration, disappointment, or maybe happiness sometimes. But then not all of these emotional, let's say, energy could be passed on or passed, up the organizational hierarchy. So I think that's also often the struggle of the mid-level management, and I've done quite some interviews in the Netherlands. When mid-level managers or leaders talk about loneliness, often the struggle is that they cannot tell others everything. Yeah.
Yes.
Or in psychology or in neuropsychology, we would talk about the phenomenon of self-disclosure. So it's not only about sharing, but the inability or self-disclosure is the sharing of personal sensitive information, including like how you feel, especially when it comes to like worries, anxiety, disappointment, and so on. So I would say the proximal finding of what drives mid-level managers or leaders to feel lonely is the inability to self-disclose. So one of my later stage projects, I hope is published soon, uh, I, is that we look at self-disclosure both upwards and downwards. So
Mm.
self-disclosure to your superiors and to disclosure to followers. So I first assume or predicted or proposed that maybe it's the inability to disclose to followers that create the problems, but it's actually the inability to disclose upwards that more likely drives loneliness among leaders or mid-level leaders. So it turns out, it seems that how we interpret the finding is that being able to disclose upwards is a signal or is an affirmation that you get supported by your seniors, even though they are not always there. Especially nowadays, there are so many global teams that there are leaders who don't even see their managers in person, right?
Yes.
Um, Whereas for the disclosure to followers, it could be seen. Some leaders may see that as a routine or or part of their jobs. Let's put it that way to
Mm.
initiate the whole relationship building process. So
Mm.
it's more like a routine rather than playing the symbolic role of creating meaning in you know uh, having a sense of like social connections that matters more than just having the quantity or the number of relations with followers. So that would be like the proximal like antecedent that we found. And then when it comes to like what are the impacts or why organizations should care about loneliness for leaders, we found that lonely leaders are more likely to have trouble sleeping. So it's also, of course, like the whole loneliness and sleep relationship is more complicated than that. But let's say
Of course.
there's
Yeah.
they are there could be a vicious cycle. But they also have more trouble in controlling their controlling their impulses, as well
Mm.
as are more likely to report feeling emotionally exhausted. So, which is a key dimension of a burnout risk. So these are uh, the major findings from my side. And of course, there are also some other scholars that or research that has shown that loneliness at work impairs your work performance.
Mm. So
Yeah.
from your research yourself, just now you mentioned you did it
Mm,
predominantly in the Netherlands,
yeah.
and now you're based in Asia. Do
Yeah.
you see a parallel within your research to
Mm,
the organization that you come across in Asia?
mm, mm, mm. So so I haven't mentioned that yet, but besides looking at self-disclosure and other key drivers that I look at, what would help or not help with preventing loneliness for leaders is the sense of power. And I think this is
Mm.
when I mean, there's still a lot of research in progress, but this is when the cultural lens or the cultural differences could come in. So here I'm talking about subjective or a sense of power. And it is shaped by whether, like regardless of culture, whether the leader feel that they have legitimate power in the role. And often
Mm.
in mid-level management, you are already there, but you don't really feel you have that much like control or decision making discretions or power and so on. And this is why a lot of mid-level managers, even though they're objectively they are at that powerful positions, but they don't feel as powerful, like subjectively or having a sense of power that triggers loneliness for that among themselves. But also when you talk about the cultural lens, I think there's quite some strong cultural differences when it comes to how individuals think about their sense of power. So one project that I actually just submitted last week or a few days ago is that very briefly we found that in cultures with horizontal individualistic values, meaning that these are the cultures that appreciate equality but also
Hmm.
independence. In these cultures, power in that sense, so power is a way for humans to differentiate from each other, right? So
Yep.
this person is either more powerful and I'm less powerful and so on.
Yeah.
In cultures where like equality is a norm, power is not as appreciated. So in that sense, we found that generally having a sense of power could protect you from feeling lonely because motivate you to satisfy your social needs more immediately, for example, through self-disclosure or networking. But in cultures with horizontal individualism, such as the Netherlands, Sweden, Scandinavian countries, I think probably Australia as well, that power is not as appreciated in very equality focused social norms. So, in that sense, the social benefits or the protective function of power is more limited in preventing loneliness. So, this is what I just submitted like a week ago. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that. We were definitely looking forward to that paper, and
I
do
hope
share with
so,
us when it's out.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned about the social lens. I've been in Asia for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
Personally lived in Hong Kong, and I know one of the things in Asia is all about the perspective, what people think about you. So face value.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier on being a mid-level manager is often very difficult to manage up, to talk
Yeah.
about it, and also
Yeah.
talk about their feelings to their team members, because in their mind it's a sign of weakness, not being able, and it equates to what you were saying about power. Power equates to face. If I do that, I'm losing face. How would my manager think of me if I share with my manager about the way I feel? And likewise, if I share with my team members, how would they view me? So do you think that could be an additional level, especially for meat managers in Asia, not only in Hong Kong? I think predominantly in the Asian culture, face is so important to us. So do you think that is a concern or something that we need to be looking out for when we're dealing with mid-level managers in Asia?
Yes, totally. I think, first of all, regardless of our cultural differences, generally loneliness is still a stigmatized emotions. So often individuals attach like when even the decision to admit that I feel lonely could trigger some like shame or guilt or like concerns about others' evaluation. So um, perhaps the problem is not on loneliness as an experience itself. I'm all for accepting emotions regardless of whether they are positive or negative. The problem is more that whether you are able to express uh, the emotions, and in this sense, the face concern could inhibit an authentic expression of your feelings, which could hinder, for example, like whether you find useful social resources to cope, but also like how you internally could build up a pattern of suppressing emotions, not only loneliness itself, because and like when a person or maybe in I could give you some examples here. For example, I've spoken to managers when they talk about what loneliness means to them. Uh, they would feel, for example, like angry, which is another emotion that I wasn't thinking about as a green researcher. But they explain that like because they feel they have invested so much in, for example, like buying their team's lunch or dinners or drinks, or trying to give them like individual considerations. But when it comes to lunch hours, no one asks me for lunch, or when I'm sick, no one sends me this I don't know, like flowers or cards and so on. So their investment is not reciprocated, and then for some people who are really concerned about like the exchange, or you mentioned like leader member exchange, right? Or also like reciprocity, that they may feel disappointed and angry, right? So feeling lonely itself could be uh, um, we would say like comorbid, or it's not only about feeling lonely, but you could have other negative emotions involved, and building a pattern of suppressing emotions could, well, long story short, it could wear you off. And it's supported by a lot of emotions research. So in that sense, I think so. Another thing that I want to bring up is that I would say that female leaders would be even more at risk, potentially in cultures where uh, expression of emotions is more difficult, because in leadership contexts, research has shown that for male leaders, often like team members or the society would judge or evaluate whether they are competent or not, or capable. But for female leaders, we have double standards in the sense that we expect them to be competent and agentic, but at the same time, we also expect them to be women in the sense that they also need to be warm and communal, caring. So so in that sense, like there's an extra job demand, if we call it
Yeah.
that way, for female leaders, and loneliness could be triggered, by having double the standards in being judged or evaluated, which going back to how I see leadership as a relationship also involves a lot of like judgment, evaluations, perceptions. So I would say, yeah, female leaders could be even more at risk.
Yeah, I mean, in most of this situation we talk about in work,
Mm,
women leaders are usually disadvantaged because
yeah,
they have, as you said, a double standards that they have to prove themselves, and
yeah,
at the same time they have to present themselves to be warm and fuzzy,
yeah,
uh, emotional
yeah.
than male leaders, which is a sad thing.
Mm,
However, we were talking about culture there earlier on.
mm,
I was just wondering, uh, with this present time. Economic climate, a
mm,
lot of us or a lot of people are working for international
yeah,
organization.
yeah,
Should the whole cultural lens be
mm,
relevant when we talk about um,
mm,
loneliness? Because as
mm,
you mentioned earlier on,
mm,
uh, countries where they are more into not having people in power about
mm,
equality,
mm, mm,
which kind of a kind of extension of their culture within international firms, and
mm,
they
mm,
establish themselves in Asia. Do
mm,
you see there is going to be a change in terms of how maybe Asian employees working for international firms will adopt the kind of mentality and dealing with loneliness a bit better
mm,
than perhaps comparing with a local firm in
mm,
Hong Kong,
mm,
whereby it is still taboo to talk about
mm.
feelings or emotion in general?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very good question, but also it's a complicated question. But if we are only, I mean, we have limited time, but if we only like zoom into preventing loneliness by creating like more meaningful connections, which is more important than having a lot of social ties. I would say as a trend, for for a healthy team or healthy organization, it's more important to reduce the salience of cultural differences. And that's generally how multinationals should be managing, or not should be, but like research has shown, to manage like cultural diversity is to not make it a thing. And
Mm,
it speaks to not only like cultural differences, like it could be like gender difference or sexual minority or other stigmatization happening at work. One way to manage issues stemming from social identity different or identity differences is to not make that identity salient.
yeah.
So one very practical approach, as I'm doing my best to promote it in Hong Kong, like through media interviews and so on, is that there's a common misconception that, especially for new leaders, they would think that when I start, coming to the team, I should, immediately do a lot of like relationship oriented investment, like
Mm,
organizing social activities, social gatherings, and then opening up about my personal life, showing like these are my family photos and so on. But actually, that would even make the cultural, like if we're only focusing on the cultural differences, it would make the cultural identity even more salient, and people will start to more easily spot the differences and see
yeah.
you less likely see you as an in-group member. And a more proactive approach is to actually focus on tasks and focus on creating like common goals or common achievements that you then you can more smoothly or more quickly develop a sense of like team identity, that we are a team together, and then our, let's say, demographic differences is less important or does not come in segregating or creating subgroups. So
Mm,
yeah, so this is my first take on your question. And then you also talk about local firms that it's taboo to talk about feelings. I think this would touch upon the question of how the organization as how organization value, how the organization as a whole, as a culture, value human capital, or whether they
mm,
want to develop a sustainable pool of talents in the organization. So And very practically, there are companies who really just want, people, the most competent people come in, get some projects done, and then we move on to another group of talents. Maybe, for example, in uh, tech sectors or industries, the technology is evolving so quickly that all like they need to prioritize like recruiting the youngest or the most uh, updated pool of talents. So I think that's fine. That could be a strategic decision as a firm or as an organization. But if the organization wants to have a group of like uh, strongly identifying or committed team members or employees, regardless of whether they are leaders or not. Because at some point, uh, this sustainable workforce would mean that even the junior employees at some point would become leaders within the organization, right?
Yes.
Then,
Yes.
then I would say it's probably more. I would suggest a more top-down approach in thinking about how you craft your organization's like culture and values, uh, so that you retain the talents, and then they would in not only in terms of like the business strategy, but also like how you treat people or how the emotional climate, how it feels to work here, to overcome potentially a loneliness, but also is related like issues.
Mm. You
Yeah.
started mentioning about a couple of tips for organization, the
Yeah.
climate, creating a conducive working environment. Because
Mm.
as you said, younger people joining the workforce, they will eventually become leaders. So
Yeah.
this is the responsibility of organization to
Mm.
create that space
Mm.
to combat the issue of loneliness. Are
Yeah.
there any more tips that is practical for organization to act upon now,
Mm.
that so that they could actually push loneliness away from their workforce?
Let me think. I think first of all, so what I'm trying to mention, one of the issue is or what I was trying to illustrate, at least in the mid-level management context, is the inability to engage in self-disclosure, and
Mm.
of course, self-disclosure. A key drivers for self-disclosure is to have trust, and
Yep.
so uh, so in that sense, it's a multi-level issue. So it's not only about organization creating certain culture, but also how people develop trust. And especially in Asian cultures, uh, a lot of decisions are made based on trust instead
Trust.
of other factors. So you need to have develop that sense of trust, not only in like between two people, but also as a team, as an organization.
Mm.
Um, so um, so what organization can do at the very least is to ensure that there's a fairness or justice climate, in terms of like having fair procedures,
Mm.
ensuring that there are like fair or just interactions and so on, and how resources are distributed. Um, and then another recommendation is to really think about what I mentioned earlier about our finding is that the sense of power for leaders, because what really emerged as an issue is that a lot of people are promoted, especially nowadays. Let's say in Hong Kong, we
Mm.
uh, I, I, I I don't know if it's the best word, but it's a bit of a talent fault line. I just created the term on my own, but on one hand, it's good that a lot of younger people get more opportunities to be promoted to leadership roles. But
Yes.
on the other hand, they may be very competent in their job content area, but being a leader is another
Yeah.
question, right?
Yes.
Or another challenge. So how organizations prepare or um, uh, help address this talent fault line issue, for
Mm.
example, like really thinking about leadership development programs, not in terms of skills, but really addressing that there's also being a leader also has an emotional or a mental health aspects. And at the same time, also like ensuring that they really earn their power positions in a legitimate way. Because again, from the interviews that I've done, a lot of young leaders or junior leaders, their loneliness stem from feeling that they don't have legitimacy in their power in their positions. So, for
Mm.
example, and I also experienced that when I was working. So I remember I had a subordinate who was a clerical staff, And she's probably 20 to 30 years older than me. So in
Yep.
reality, like she could already be a parent of mine. Uh, but then when it comes to writing her performance appraisal report, I felt so uncomfortable. I was only in my early 20s. And I
Yes.
was like, well, who am I to judge
Yeah.
her performance, right? So I mean there may be like different examples of like self-doubts, but I wouldn't say it's all about the person's like um inefficacy or not being confident, but it's also like how the position makes you feel that you are comfortable to exercise your control, exercise your power. And
Mm,
I think that's something is about how the job or the role is designed that gives you the comfortable or legitimate power to do
mm,
what you are expected to do as a leader. And
yeah.
honestly, I think it's a bit of an issue in many cultures, including Hong Kong, but not limited to. Yeah.
Yeah, I do see your point about having that support element of
Mm,
leaders as they are going into leadership program. Often we see leadership programs all about getting the right stuff done
mm,
properly, have the social skills to how to deal and lead your team members, but
yeah.
we don't really focus on the individual being a
Mm,
leader, their
yeah.
needs, and also their emotional capacity to
Mm,
deal with all this
mm,
responsibility.
yeah.
Some responsibility are not very clearly delineated, as we know in job description.
Yeah.
Some are added responsibility in itself can be a burden for the individual while they're trying to manage everything else.
Yes. Totally.
A team, and then also their direct manager. So
Mm,
that is fantastic to let organization know there are more to it than just actually providing an opportunity for a leader.
yeah.
On the other hand, what would be
Mm,
your tips for individuals who are now experiencing perhaps
mm,
loneliness in the workplace?
mm. I think immediately first, of course, I hope like lonely individuals find safe and appropriate targets for self disclosure, and it seems from my finding that being able to disclose to someone who's like in a more powerful or more senior positions than yours is even more helpful in protecting you from feeling lonely. But other I would say, but back to loneliness itself as a phenomenon, is there are different aspects of it. So first is to un- I think the first is to understand or appreciate that loneliness. I mean, not only loneliness, but all negative emotions has a function, have a function that that. So in that sense, I subscribe or I believe in the whole evolutionary theory of or evolutionary psychology theory or approach to emotions. Is that humans we our ancestors pass on through the genes with these like negative emotions for a reason because they help us survive.
Yep.
Because if they are unhelpful, then they should have been eliminated as as our humankind developed, right, or evolved over time. So um, it could be loneliness, it could be other types of negative emotions, but they serve a certain purpose. But we are so used to rejecting uh, negative emotions because it's unpleasant, for
Yes.
sure, but we don't really get a lot of opportunities to reflect on what these negative emotions mean to us. So
Mm,
loneliness immediately, I would say, is actually our mind, because I would say mind because it's not only our brain, but also there's our body also react to that. But that's another question. Um, but loneliness is a signal from our body or from our mind reminding us that we need social connections, but also there could be a threat in our social network or interactions, and they could speak to two different things, right? So the reminder to reconnect is more about like reminding you to approach something, like maybe you need to reach out to
mm,
someone. But when it's a signal to remind you that there are social threats, like maybe there are people at work who are isolating you, or even like making gossips or creating like scandals or rumors and so on. Then that avoidance instinct is indeed helpful, so that you have a more careful assessment of your social environment at work. So again, it could get I could talk about this like forever, but first, like think about what the emotions are trying to communicate with us. I think that's
yeah.
the first tip. And then the second tip is, I would say, um, is I, I actually think it's a very interesting finding. It may sound a bit like weird at first, but somehow there are objects or tangible items when they could remind you of a sense of connectedness that could immediately or more temporarily relieve your loneliness. So some examples from previous like recent research is drinking chicken soup.
Ah,
So I
okay.
try to introduce some like fun or interesting findings here so that we don't lose our audience here. But research has shown like if you consume chicken soup, that create revives or relives your early child experience of being
Ah,
pampered, being cared for.
being
So that
nurtured. Yeah.
yeah, so that's a temporary relief of loneliness. And then another thing is to uh, uh, engage in activities that is fitting with your personality. So one finding is that uh, introverts, so I'm one of them, so that's why I remember this finding. Introverts would get a relief of loneliness only by buying a book. So
Ah,
yeah, so that's of course like we could reflect on like how true or how strong this effect is, but there are
yeah.
some findings supporting that. But also there are I've also seen research showing that like putting photos of your family or your loved ones on the desk, having some tangible items, even they only play symbolic meanings, but as long as they could remind you of a sense of
Mm.
social connectedness, that's a relief, a temporary relief for loneliness as well.
Mm. Oh, I like that. Take perspective of the situation that you're in,
Yeah.
that sense of loneliness, but
Mm,
then find something that could connect you with a loved one to
mm,
remind you to have that temporary offset of that loneliness feeling.
yeah.
And obviously, I love the third one that you were talking about, chicken soup. If
Yeah.
all fails, chicken soup will nurture you and give it a sense of comfort. Of
Mm,
course, it has good properties drinking
mm,
chicken
mm,
soup, especially if you're sick.
mm,
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing those tips. I would just
yeah.
want to say it has been fantastic talking to you. And loneliness in the workplace is something that all of us go through. It's
Yeah.
how we look at it and whether how we choose to manage it in our own
Mm,
different ways. While we
yeah.
cannot control some of the antecedents that's within the organizational
Mm,
environment, as an individual, we can obviously do something about it.
yeah.
Before I go and say thank you very much and end this whole podcast, are there any more tips from your side that you would like to share with our listeners?
Mm, not at the moment, but I would say I would say overall the message or the my motivation to keep working on research on this line of this research program is that I think it's also a moral statement to raise to public or organizations that leaders are only human. And I think I wouldn't say all of us, but many of us easily fall prey to the whole idea to be positive and being cheerful, happy all the time, and that's also quite some people would expect from a leader.
Yeah.
Um, but this kind of like overly positive attitude could sometimes like blatantly or implicitly reject that any negativity in at least in organizational life is
Yeah.
also normal,
Yeah.
and that could be the starting point of the problem. So when we like as more and more organizations recognize the need for wellness or well-being, mental health, but also sustainable workforce, I think one major change is to recognize that at least in leadership context, leaders are only human, and therefore uh, yeah, so don't see them as a token to generate happiness, but they are also human, and they have their emotional and well-being needs as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us in this
You're
podcast.
welcome.
And I know our listeners will be getting a lot of tips from it. And if you are okay with it, would it be all right for us to share your research to
Of
our
course.
listeners? And we'll put
Yes,
that in our show
definitely.
notes.
And
All
I'll
right.
also share the chicken soup study. So
Yes, please do.
yeah, so I don't know if it works for vegetarian, like if it's a vegetarian soup, but maybe like we need more research on that. But
Yes.
yeah.
All right then. Thank you very much, Hodar, for
Thank you so
talking to us
much,
today.
Austin.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.